Hi, Rich Hill, language arts students. Thank you for inviting me into your classroom today to share this time with you. My name is Janet Reed. I'm a local writer who lived in Nevada until about 2 years ago. I moved to Kansas City and started a writing program up here. COVID is keeping us all self-contained, so I'm glad to be able to join you from my home office and share a little bit about writing with you. So, Mrs. Intrican, you should know, is one of my very favorite students from the time that I lived in Nevada. So, you are very lucky to have her, and I am happy to be able to work with her on this project and with you. So, she sent me a list of some questions that she would like me to answer for you, and I'm going to do that, and then I'm sending her some writing exercises that I like to do myself and some that I hope will stimulate your creativity and encourage you to write. So, a little bit about myself is I taught at Crowder and Cotty and Pittsburgh State and Missouri Southern for about 20 years and got to the point where I had enough years of service in that I could retire. And the one thing that I had always wanted to do that I had not yet done was to be a writer. And I have been working since about 2015 really seriously on craft and publishing. My first book came out in 2019. And so I took the opportunity and took this big risk to blow up my life and move to Kansas City and start a new program. I was here about 8 months before COVID happened, and I've been locked up in an apartment since then, like you guys have, right? We've all been locked up. So I'm hopeful that we'll soon get life back to normal and things can, the wheels can grind back up and we can take off. So the few questions that Mrs. Inderkin wanted me to answer, I'll do that. And then if you have any questions that you would like to email me, she has my email address and I'd be delighted to talk to you about your writing adventures. Her first question is my favorite book. And I got to tell you, you just don't ask an English person what a favorite book is because we have a list that's really super long. So I'm going to go with just one that I think that I could read, reread, read every year and love it. And that is David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. It's a story of redemption about a boy who has a bad childhood and has a terrible time, but manages to find his way through and become a really good human. I always feel so good when I finish reading that book. So when times are bad, I reach for David Copperfield. And in fact, maybe it's about time for David Copperfield again. So, Mrs. Intrican's second question is what is the first book that made me cry? Well, again, I'm an English person. Lots of books have made me cry. But the first one takes me all the way back to when I was a girl living in Springfield, Missouri. And that is, I was probably in fourth grade when I read Old Yeller, this book by Fred Gibson. You may have seen the Disney movie of Old Yeller, but the book is a real heart gut punch about a dog who saves a family and uh, becomes part of that family and then has to be put down because a rabid wolf attacked him. And when Old Yeller has to be put down, my heart broke and I sobbed. So I'm going to say that's the first book that made me cry, but it is certainly not the last. I always say it's like with David Copperfield. I have a soft spot for lost children and good people who underdogs who need redemption. Give me that, and I'm going to boohoo every single time. right? Okay, so if I could tell my younger writer self anything, what would it be? Wow, that is such a fantastic question because I grew up in a family that did not value writing, did not value reading or storytelling. And so I was very ambivalent about writing and didn't feel like it was worth it or that I was any good or that it mattered. The atmosphere in my family was really negative about it, which is part of the reason why I didn't come to it for real until fairly late in my life. So, if I could tell my younger writer self anything, it would be don't listen to bad advice. Don't do it. If you feel the need to write something down, to explore a story through writing, either something that is true and happened to you or something that your storyline you're making up, believe in it and write it and then hang on to it. Don't let anybody take those stories and that, excuse me, work away from you. My favorite author, again, Mrs. Intrican, you know better than this because I can't tell you a favorite. There's Charles Dickens and David Copperfield. Did I mention that one? Um, I think my first favorite author, though, was Carolyn Keene and the Nancy Drew books. Those were super formative for me when I was young and learning to love a story and being hooked on turning pages, plot stories. Loved them. Right? And so her next question is, what or who inspired you to start writing? And it was the Nancy Drew books. I loved books from the time I was a little girl, and I had to pursue those on my own. The only book we had in our house was the Bible. My parents were not readers. In fact, my dad couldn't read until I was probably 8 or 9, and my mom taught him to read. But again, it was just the Bible that was in our house. I was the only reader, and they were pretty suspicious of my reading. But we had a bookmobile that was like a little library, a bus, like a library on wheels that would come into the neighborhood every 2 weeks. And I would go to the bookmobile, and the librarian who was on the bookmobile gave us help. And she asked me what kind of stories I liked, and I was like, I don't know. And she handed me a Nancy Drew book, and I took it home and I read it quickly. And then I turned around and read it again and went back to the bookmobile and ended up reading every Nancy Drew book that they had. And then I started writing my own. I developed this character who was like Nancy Drew, but she was also like me. You know, Nancy Drew was blonde headed. My character, Laura Drake, was a brunette. Nancy Drew had a boyfriend. I didn't need one of those. Did not need a boy to help me solve a case. So Laura had no boyfriend. Um, Nancy Drew had a really cool car that her dad bought for her. My character had a VW Beetle. It was purple. Okay, so you can kind of see how I used that as a frame and then remade it myself. I wrote probably 7 or 8 Laura Drake stories on wide line notebook paper when I was in middle school, early high school. 45 to 60 handwritten pages of Laura Drake stories. And I knew in writing those that I had found something that I loved to do. And again, nobody in my family took it seriously, so I didn't do anything with those stories, but they were really instrumental in helping me think through the logic of a story. So I encourage you, when you feel like writing, just write. Find time to do it and tell your stories and hold on to them. You'll be amazed as you get older and you come back to them how much joy they give you to be able to pull them out and look at them. Okay, so what advice would I give to a new writer, someone just starting out? I think I just did. I think I gave you that advice, and that is to believe in yourself, to write when you have something to say, and sometimes write when you don't have anything to say. Sometimes not having something to say is the result of too much to say, and you can't narrow it down to something. So just sitting down and free writing whatever you're thinking about is really good advice. And the more that you do, the better that you will become. My inspiration, where does it come from? That's Mrs. Entriken's next question. And so my inspiration comes from my experience and from the feelings that I have about those. I read a lot and I try to keep up on what's happening in the world, and I try to pay careful attention to what I see around me. And then I write about those things, and I try to be true even if my feelings about something change after I've written something. I i was true to it in the moment that I wrote it. So that's where my inspiration comes from. And finally, her last question is, what are you currently reading? Well, I've got 4 or 5 different books going, so I try to keep something going just for fun. And right now I'm reading Hamnet, a book based on Shakespeare, a story about Shakespeare's son. And you know, Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. Well, he had a son named Hamnet, which is the same name. English has kind of mutated those together. And that book is written by Maggie O'Farrell, and it came out last year. So I'm reading that for fun. I'm reading a new book of poetry called Throne in the Throat by a writer named Benjamin Garcia. I'm reading a kind of philosophical thing about happiness called 10% Happier. And so I've got 3 or 4 different books going at the present time, and I normally do that. I have my tables are full of things that I'm working on. I try to spend a little bit of time doing that every day. And so what we spend our time doing and what we spend our energies thinking about leads us into the kind of people we become. Our stories are central to the people we are. And the better we understand those stories, the stronger we're going to be to deal with all of the issues that touch our lives. And so I seriously encourage you to tell your stories, to think of your earliest memory and write about it, to think about the favorite Christmas experience you had or the worst Christmas experience you had, and write about it. How did you feel about it? What happened? Who was there? What was the room like? And then you can use that material and craft it into something that you might want to share with somebody someday. Writing is a beautiful experience. Its craft is really hard work. And a lot of the stuff I write never makes it out of my journal. But the things that I do take to that next step, I try to get published and share with people who are interested in reading it. Find your readers, right? Become a reader. And so that's the best advice that I have for you, is to pay attention and then just do it. Right. Well, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you for a few minutes today on this read-in day. And I hope maybe next year I can see you in person and we're done with COVID next year. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I would like that a lot. So again, thank you. I'm glad to have had this time to share with you, and I thank your teacher for inviting me into your classroom. Goodbye, everyone.